We've all heard the terms early game, mid game, end game, but what does it really mean? Understanding where you are in your game of Magic is so important because it'll help you identify when to turn the corner and win. So today I'm going to define for you the 3 stages that exist in every game of Magic the Gathering. Make sure you stay tuned to the end of this video because I will also talk about how each deck archetype will play out in each stage so that you know no matter what you're piloting, what you're supposed to do, and when you can turn the corner. But first, let's get a visual. Imagine this. You're in a race. Both you and your opponent are on equal footing at the beginning of the race on turn 1, where the only advantage is who's on the play versus who's on the draw. And you're going to your win condition, which will be the finish of the game. Throughout this journey, you guys are passing through each of 3 stages. This structure is where you apply tempo. Concepts like relative tempo gain and tempo momentum are what moves you through the different stages. We talked about those concepts in this video right here. As you advance, you might be in stage 1 and stage 2, but your opponent might be all the way in stage 3. And understanding this difference is what will help you understand what you need to do to win. And understanding this difference will not only help you win, but will help you understand exactly what your opponent is trying to do. Now let's dive into the stages and we'll follow that up with a paradigm that you could take with you that's so easy to learn. So stage 1 of a game of Magic the Gathering is what we call the early game. Here, you can't do much. And that's because you're limited to 1 land per turn. Because you can't cast that many spells, you're operating below what is called your minimum game threshold. Your minimum game threshold is the level at which your deck operates at a basic level. And note that this is a function of your deck, not the archetype or strategy. A couple examples in Pioneer are mono white humans, which with 2 lands can cast virtually every spell in the deck, versus blue-white control, which requires at a minimum 4 to 5 lands in order to be online. So your deck is in stage 1 while you are operating below your minimum game threshold. Your goal should be to advance from this stage as effectively as possible. Okay, let's talk about stage 2. Stage 2 is what we call the mid game, and this is the most strategically important part of the game. That's because players can cast most or all of their spells, and this also creates the greatest opportunity for mistakes. In stage 2, a lot of your decisions matter. Things we've already talked about, like sequencing your land drops and in what order you cast threats. And on the more permissive side of things, what resources you choose to deny your opponent. These mistakes and decision points create battles in the mid-game over incremental advantage. The winner of these tactical decisions, the winner of these tactical battles, will achieve their strategic objective first, advancing to their endgame and more than likely a win. Your fastest decks will finish in stage 2. One of the way fast decks finish games is with reach. To understand more of what that means, take a look at our red aggro micro archetype video linked up here. So let's talk about everyone's favorite part of a game of Magic, the endgame. The endgame is where trumps, think your most powerful spells in the deck, will lock the endgame or prevent your opponents from doing so. Very few of your opponent's cards matters as they are severely limited in meaningful ways to affect the board. Let's take a look at that race visualization that we had earlier to understand what this means. And imagine a mid-range deck against a control deck matchup. So here both decks are advancing through stage 1 at relatively the same pace. Remember, this is a relative comparison, and each deck will operate differently. Now, let's say we enter stage 2, where most of our strategic decisions and mistakes are made. The goal of the control player in stage 2 will be to deny the resources of the mid-range player, prevent their life total from going to 0. So the control player might do things like deny resources, setting the mid-range player back until he can deploy more threats. This will create an environment where the control player may continue to advance to deploy their trumps, while the mid-range player is still trying to make the right tactical decisions to advance to an endgame strategy. In this scenario, the control player will continue into stage 3 and likely win the game before the mid-range player even has the opportunity to exit stage 2. So that was a hot and dirty on the 3 stages of a game of Magic. Now let's talk about how different archetypes play out during those stages. So your fast aggro decks will win on stage 2. Before your opponent's deck will have the ability to play their trumps, and they do this via their reach spells or grand finishers to get the last bit of aggro through or combat damage through in a game. Your big decks, think control or large creature decks, their goal is to survive stage 1. And they use stage 2 to position themselves for their stage 3 trumps or big creatures or big spells that will deny their opponents the opportunity from doing anything. Now, the combo deck is really interesting because they will expend their resources to advance to stage 3 as quickly as possible. An example of a pure combo deck in Pioneer that does this extremely well is Lotus Field, where they're trying to get out 3 mana using 1 card called Lotus Field as quickly as possible, which puts them through the stage 2 portion of the game where they can cast a sequence of spells that will allow them to win. Now, control, like the deck that we talked about in our previous example, they allow the game to progress, but on their own terms. They survive stage 2 where all the decisions are made by removal. Now that can either be creature removal or resource denial, board wipes, and counter spells in order to manage their opponent in a way that allows the control player to advance while setting their opponent back. This is why so many players get frustrated playing against control, because they don't get to advance through the different stages in the game. Now, understanding the different stages of a game and how archetypes play out in those stages is critically important because it allows us to develop a paradigm. Think a meta perspective to have on every game of Magic you play. This paradigm will also help you make decisions in deck selection for tournaments, taking a look at where the meta is for your particular format, whether that's standard, modern, pioneer, limited, etc., cedh, whatever your cup of tea is, this can apply. And that's because understanding these stages lets us know what beats what and when it's going to win. So we know that early decks like aggro will lose to mid-range decks, right? They have just the right combination of creatures and an aggressive strategy, as well as control via resource denial or creature removal. Mid-range decks, however, are not really good at either of those things, and they'll tend to lose to games that play to the late game, where late game big decks, whether that's big creature or control, will be able to outvalue the individual advantage that the mid-range player is attempting to get. This also explains why late game decks tend to lose to fast aggro. So again, we have early loses to mid-game decks. Mid-game decks loses to late-game decks, and late-game decks loses to early-game decks. You see, just having this basic understanding of the different stages of the game not only will help you win more, but will help you understand things as early as deck selection for a metagame in a tournament. And in-game, it'll help you make decisions based off of your understanding of what your opponent is trying to do and what you should be doing, individualized to your deck strategy. Remember, this is where tempo is applied. So understanding this format will help you understand that complicated topic again. Hey guys, my name is Navigator. Thank you so much for watching today. The only thing I could ever ask of you is to subscribe, like, and share with a friend. Have you noticed that you're struggling with any part of Magic theory or strategy that's holding you back in your gameplay? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, always choose violence.